Hello everyone, welcome to IMPRINT IS. I'm Varun Kullar and we're looking at the Indian Express and the Hindu Daily News Discovery for the 13th and 14th of December 2018, right? So let's start. So what all we'll be covering today? We'll look at what is the prompt corrective action and its impact. We look at the NBFC credit crunch, Subramanium or RBI reserves. There's the editorial on GDP, right, series in the Hindu, right? We look at the IIP index and a couple of prelim questions related to this. Then we look at the editorial on executive courts, right? How the courts are suddenly going into too much into the domain of the the executive. Then a lack of basic rights of the age. The Supreme Court is talking about this. Then the most Google searched a term of the year, that is Section 377. What is Section 377? Groundwater crisis in India, and then miscellaneous editorials and news, right? Okay, so let's start. Okay, first we'll start with GS3, right? So we look at the Indian economy science sector first. Okay, so the first thing that has happened is that bankers have asked Shakti Kanta Das, right, who's new RBI governor, right, that the central bank should relax the prompt corrective norms on the ground that it was hurting the credit offtake, right, and especially in an election year, right. So obviously it becomes very, very important. So bankers highlighted the challenges they're facing to boost loan growth. As the 11 state-run banks under prompt corrective actions, and this was imposed after the banks breached the nearest threshold on net non-performing assets, capital, and reserve assets. So obviously this was done scientifically, right? At least, but obviously the banks are saying that it would hurt credit growth, and that would not be good for the growth of the economy, especially in an election year. Though they have not said that in the election year part, that I'm adding. Okay, bad loans in the banking, obviously have increased over the last 3 years, where gross NPAs crossing the 10 lakh, right, and the risk in NPAs have impacted profitability and eroded their capital, right. So that is what has happened. So the request comes when the growth is slowing and NBFCs are constrained by lack of liquidity, because even the Moody's yesterday before has talked about the fact that if this continues, it's going to be a huge problem, right. And remember, public sector, if NBFCs can't loan, and PSUs have to come in, and obviously they have capital constraints, right, to fill this. So it's become a huge issue, right. There's a controversial 12th February circular of the RBI. This is another problem, right, which mandates restructuring loans and to make higher provisions even if there was default for 1 day. Now, that makes no sense in some ways, right. I think the 30-day period makes a lot more sense before this should be kicked in. Okay. Let's go ahead. Okay, so just to revise, just to have an idea, what is this PCA? So it looks at capital, asset quality, profitability, right? Obviously, to be there, right? That is what they look into it. Then they will look at, indicators are tracked for obviously CRAR, the common equity tier ratio, the net NPA ratio, the return on assets, right? In case you do not know about them, please just Google search about these terms. You'll get an idea. Leverage will be monitored additionally at the part of the PCA framework, right? And the breach of any risk they hold could also result in the invocation of PCA. Then the PCA framework would apply to all banks, in India, including the small banks and the foreign banks. The bank will be, placed under the PCA framework based on the audited annual financial results and supervisory statement made by the RBI. So they'll be looking at these indicators, right? And we look at capital, asset quality, and profitability. Definitely, we look at leverage, and we look at breach of risk threshold, right? And if it has breached, obviously, will be the bank going to PCA. In case you want details, you can go to this. If you have any questions regarding it, do comment here itself, right, on the video. Okay, so just to have an idea, what is this? So for capital, what is the indicator? So CRAR, minimum regulatory prescription for capital to risk ratio plus applicable capital conservation buffer, and it has been minimum. Current minimum RBI prescription of 10.25, that is 9.9% minimum total capital plus 1.25 CCB, right? And this is it. Or it says and or regulatory pre-subscribed trigger of common tier equity plus applicable. So basically they're saying 6.75, right? That is 5.5 plus 1.25. So breach of either CRAR or set one would trigger PCA, and that is there, right? And there are risk thresholds, which have also said that if it's obviously between 10.25 and 7.5, right? It is below this indicator. It is between these two. Then there's big threshold, right? And then if it is between 6.25 and 7.75, then what do we do? This is threshold 2. And if it is less than 3.625, then what, right? This is threshold 3. Okay, asset quality, we look at the net non-performing assets ratio. It's obviously greater than 6 and less than 9, greater than 9 but less than 12, and greater than 12%. So this is the real one. Then return on assets, it looks at negative ROA assets for 2 consecutive years, 3 years, and obviously for 4 years. The leverage ratio, we look at Tier 1 leverage ratio between 4 to 3.35%, right, and 3.5, or less than 3.5%. So that is the basic idea. Okay, though this I'm just showing you because I think nobody would have actually gone into the details of this. So please just go through it. So the objective type question would be that which of the following are considered in taking the prompting the PCA. So these 4 are the questions, right? These 4 are the, so our capital, asset quality, profitability, and leverage are the 4 connotations of the PCA. Okay, let's look at Moody's now. So Moody's says that the NBFC cash crunch could hit credit supply. So Moody's said that on Thursday that liquidity constraints faced by some NBFCs will tighten the overall credit supply in the country and will impact growth. And consequently, India growth will slow down to just above 7% for fiscal 2019 and 2020. And this is below the estimated 7.4 for March 2018. Okay, right? And any further distress in the NBFI market would, obviously, significant risk would be there. Right? Remember the NBFCs, after the demonetization had really kicked in and really took up the issues that were happening in the banking system, right? The real estate was having a financial crunch after demonetization, and they basically provide the funds for this. Okay, so that's the case. Now, obviously, the idea should be that since the public sector banks have 70% of the market share, they have capital constraints and they will be unable to fill the space vacated by the NBFC. So this is the major problem, right? Because the NBFCs contribute 17% of the total takeoff and 1/3 of the retail credit. So this is something, again, you should have this data with you whenever you write a question on NBFCs. And a possible question is, going to come, let's say, in mains list next year. Okay, and then RBI, excess capital should not be used to fund deficit, right? So former Chief Economic Advisor Subramanium said that it is important to protect the RBI autonomy and there must be open technical questions on the issues in the present context. Right? He says that I want to convey that preserving the integrity, autonomy, and independence of RBI, which is one of the most India's few legitimately strong institutions, very important, and its sanctity needs to be preserved. Right, and no attempt to politicize the board or other things should be allowed. He said the conversation, right, with PCV Somanathan, right. Now he says basically the problem right now is happening is that RBI has a lot of excess funds, right? Excess capital on it. That's what the government thinks, and right. He says that even if the RBI is overcapitalized, it should not be used for financing the deficit, that is expenditure, etc. The excess capital must be used only in targeted areas to solve the twin balance sheet problem and certain other purposes, which would add to the long-term growth of the economy. So, if you want to solve some problem, solve the problem of the banking. Basically try to use the excess capital as a guarantee, so that the banks can actually lend on normal terms. Okay, then we have Santosh Mehrotra. He's a professor of JNU in economics, and I think this is one of the most beautiful articles, a must read. I would suggest to all of you to cut this article, right? And right, so basically what you're supposed to do is cut this article, keep it, right? Because this would answer a lot of interview questions as well as mains questions, right? Okay, so they think that there are substantial questions being raised about the new GDP back series. Now, the first question is obviously, how is the GDP growth higher in estimates just released at 7.4%, right, for since 2014 and only 6.7% during the UPA years? Okay, right. The three changes, occurred in the revision, right? So the answer is this. So first is the base year, change. So you picked up a year which is not the best of years. It's an economic crisis year in India and the world, so not a good base year to take anyhow. Then you've changed the methodology and you're saying you've taken GDP and market prices, and this is the international norm, and obviously, right, this says that this is better than the GDP and factor cost that was before. Right. In case you do not know the definitions of GDP at market prices and GDP at factor cost, this is something that you should look up right now. Just Google it. Right? Okay. Then third, the method of estimating company output revenue, which has been done in a more detailed manner because the MC21 data is not available. This is available after 2008. So this is a problem, right? Because obviously this data is not available prior. So what are you calculating 2004 to 2008? So, you're bound to depress this. That is what this article is saying. Another source is obviously CSOU's deflator, which might be different from the BAC series. Okay, so this is another problem that it might be the case. Another issues are also there that, let's say, these days, if you look at the telecom sector, the calculation, you make, right now is using the number of minutes used or, but think about it right now, everything is free. From Jio to Reliance to Airtel, right? Everything you're calling is free and only we pay for data. So if you think about that, and if you think about 2005, right? At that time, you used to pay for data. So if you're comparing this, it's like being very unreasonable, right? So this is one of the other reasons why the GDP growth is depressed. Then the article writer talks about the fact that agriculture growth rates at constant prices were much higher from 2004 to 2014. And why? Because for a simple reason, they are back-to-back drought years in 2014-15. And policies have not been supportive and farmers agitating. You just lost the election in MP and Rajasthan, right? And in Chhattisgarh, all right? So basically that tells you that something is wrong. Then it says that the index of agriculture production had risen to 129 in 2013-14, right? If you take 2007-8 as 100, now, but it had it has fallen down and it had barely recovered 2013, 2017-18. So obviously, agriculture, right? It collapsed also after demonetization and then a poorly implemented GST. So definitely this sector is not doing well. So how is that you're having a higher growth rate? Then they're saying that exports have been going bad. There were only 50 billion exports in 2002, but they have risen to 250 billion and reached a peak of up to 315 billion, and they have not even recovered to that level, right? So exports were going really well in the UPA years. So if you look at, if I basically just try to explain you something. So what is GDP? Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus X. So what is this? This is private consumption, this is investment, this is government spending, this is exports, this is imports. Now, here, take it very simply. So consumption is the only yardstick by which I can say maybe the GDP is growing, because investment is down, and we'll talk about this, investment to GDP ratio, right? Savings were very less, then it rose to 36.8, and now obviously they have again gone down. So investment to GDP ratio has gone down. Exports are down, investment to GDP ratio is down, government spending, okay, maybe, but obviously you're maintaining fiscal deficit targets, but that's not going to happen. So how can consumption take over everything? So therefore, there's a lot of fudging of data, it seems here. Okay, this rising savings rate contributed to unprecedented increase in GDP to investment to GDP ratio, as we talked about. So this is a very important thing. If you think about GDP growth rate, you have to think in terms of the investment ratio, and GDP is related to investment, right? So there itself, we basically can realize the fact that right now the investment to GDP ratio is very, very low, and as investment drives growth, we really don't believe what this government in some way is saying, right? Then the slowing of growth is consistent with the trend of IIP. IIP right now only rose to 125 from a base year of 111. Okay, so that's again an issue. Slower industrial growth has been also suggested by other indicators. The bank credit growth, right? There's been no year bank credit growth has grown more than 10.9%, right? That's the range now. And then the plant load factor, possible energy, right? ratio of energy produced from maximum possible energy is 68%, right? But it had never fallen below 70. But that may be because of excess capacity. So okay, this might be given. So the idea being, so the growth rate, right, is proportional to an investment, and this investment is proportional to savings and obviously the mood of the investor. And after the hits of demonetization and GST, private investment in India is very, very poor. Okay, the next one is IIP has obviously also every year in October, obviously industrial IIP will go high because it's Diwali week year, right? Diwali week, and so this is going really, really well, right? And retail inflation in November is also down, so I think I think you should just copy this. That inflation is going down, right? 4.9 now it's 2.3, 6.8 is 8.8, so everything looking good. So growth of IIP is 8.08 in October, up from 4.47% in the previous year. But I think this is normal because October will always give good results, right? The electricity volume growth has re-entered double-digit territory after a gap of 2 years, and the consumer segment also has gained from a favorable base, right? Most non-durables and non-durables are on a healthy uptrend, so growth is good, going well. Then other bound growth in CPI, right, slowed down. Actually, it's not looking that great because it's going towards India needs a steady inflation as well, because growth is also related to inflation. Because inflation, what is inflation? But expectation of price increase. And if there's going to be price increase, people would obviously produce more. So obviously that would be good for the economy. Okay, let's look at a 2015 prelims question. So index of IIP, which of the following has the highest weight? Coal production, electricity, fertilizers, and steel. So I've given the 8 core industry, which comprise of 40.27% of the total weight of the IIP. Coal is 10.33, right? Then electricity is here 19.25, fertilizer is 2.363, and steel is 17.8. So obviously the highest is this 8. So this is the answer. Okay, the other type of question which has come in the prelims as well is they are asked which of the following are a part of the 8 core industries, and they've actually in that question they basically put textile as one of the option, which is not the answer. So you have to choose that one. So that is the type of question which can come, right? Okay, let's go ahead. Then we have engaging with climate change. Krishna Kumar talks about, he's a former director of NCRT, and he's a author of Education, Conflict and Peace. So Krishna Kumar says that there were thousands of children, right, demonstrating on the streets of Australian cities at the end of November. Now the question is, what would they were, demonstrating against? They were protesting against the government's lackluster response to climate change. And their protest march coincided with the G20 summit in Argentina, and the summit showed no consensus on climate change, proving the point that children had made on Australia, right? And the political leaders are not serious about environmental crisis. Okay, now what happened was the Resources Minister Matt Callanan was sharp. What he said is that the children should learning about geology and mining that protesting on the streets. Okay, and typically, he was referring to some of the coal mining projects. Some of the children specifically mentioned, right? The Australian Prime Minister on his way to G20 summit said that the students should learn on education and learning and not avoid activism. All politicians tend to say that when they're politicians, right? Okay, that's a big problem. So this basically, interesting thing about this is that many parents and teachers have given consent for this kind of right, and some have encouraged the children to go out on the streets. The deeper inspiration come from plans reported from the Swedish schools. So Swedish and Australian children have been studying environmental science in their curriculum, and it specifically refers to dangers of global warming and impending disaster associated with climate change. So a huge issue is going to be there. Now, the question is why so many people don't believe in climate change. So the idea is the concept formation. Why people think climate change is a myth is easy to explain. A basic lesson in geography in elementary schools along the world concerns with distinction between climate and weather. right? Weather changes from day to day, from season to season, according to standard geography checks. Climate, on the other hand, is a permanent frame through which we study changing weather conditions. And obviously, changing the climate obviously is classifying the world into zones, right? So for India, an educated person is expected to know there are 6 climate zones, and many of them recall the different colors we used to fill up these maps in an exam. And concepts obviously form a stable frame of minds when you grow up. And obviously it is intellectually challenging for people to reconcile the notion of climate with the idea of climate change that the UN is using to warn people against terrible economic disaster, right? And another idea is UN is doing is basically sustainable development. So this is the basic problem typically, right? And he says that rethinking schooling is a necessity now, because the way it is being taught obviously is difficult for people to imagine that climate is going to change, right? Because obviously it's not going to really impact in all the aspects that people might think it would. Okay, so he mentions Sunita Narayan, right? Conflict of interest. He says all environmental struggles are caught in sharp divided goals of popular politics and people right to live in a safe and sustainable environment. And the people who espouse environmental causes are seen as romantics, and those who support, right, economic growth based on rapid industrialization are perceived as practical realists. But the Australian children have actually rejected this. They figured out the term climate change means little to their political leaders, and this UN report released just when the G20 was starting says that the window of opportunity to avoid climate change will go away. Right, and remember, it's the children who will pay for it, because most of us will actually be dead by the time climate change will really hit us, right? So that's another problem that the leaders of today actually face, that they have the moral hazard. They know that very well that they won't be alive to face the climate change. Okay. Then we look at defense, and the Indian Navy has joined a selected group of naval forces in the world to have its first non-tethered submarine rescue vehicle, and is at the Naval Dockyard System, right? So it can operate at a depth of 650 meters and rescue 14 people at a time. It's a state-of-art equipment for decompression chamber and can accommodate submariners and a remotely operated vehicle. Okay, so this is extremely good, right? And this is something, because remember we have a decent submarine strength here. So of each class, we have a Russian Kilo class 9 submarines, we have German HW, the heavy diesel 1, 4 of them. We have a nuclear submarine, and we have the indigenous nuclear ballistic submarine RNS Arihant. So this is extremely good for us. Okay, let's go ahead. The next is parliamentary panel has recommended that the center takes urgent steps to ensure that the NSG, the country's premier terrorist and contingency force, equipped with its own dedicated air wing, right? So this is basically, remember we had the issues later before in the 2008 attacks, right? Because there was a delay in NSG reaching during the Mumbai attacks. Right, and Chidambaram said that the 2 M17 helicopters procured were grounded and they were unavailable. Okay, so it is unsubmersible, so you need to have a different air wing, right, in real time as well. Just to remind you, NSG was raised in 1986 following the assassination of the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and Operation Blue Star. The force, which is trained to operate as an elite urban anti-terrorist, anti-hijack force, doesn't have its own cadre or direct recruitment, but it depends on deputation from the army and safety police forces. So again, here's a huge issue itself. I think this is also needs to be specialized as well here. Right. Okay. So let's go ahead. Then the parliamentary panel also has recommended that the post of DG and other senior posts in the CAPF should not be reserved for IPS officers, and obviously the CAPF itself should have the DG ranks people, because it will encourage people to join the CAPFs. Okay, General Study Paper 2 now. SE has batted for death row convicts to be allowed, people, family, health professionals for a reasonable period of time, like any other prisoner. And basically under Article 21, 14, right, and 19. It's a part of their fundamental right to dignity and equality, and that is Article 21. That's what. And this is the judgment came suo motu, right, and taking cognizance of the rights of incarcerated and conditions in prisons across the country. Then we have Gautam Bhatia, and he's talking about the fear of executive courts. So what does he say? He says India urgently needs to return to a thriving legal culture that uncompromisingly calls out political posturing. Now we have very interesting thing that has happened. We have Justice S.R. Sen, and he said anybody opposing Indian laws and constitution cannot be considered citizens of the country. He's basically forgetting fundamentally that how did we reach freedom? Uh, we oppose British laws, right? Opposition to laws doesn't mean you're not a citizen of the country. There's no legal provision like that. Okay, so when a justice says such a thing, I think that's called for impeachment in some ways. But anyhow, and then he says India should have been declared a Hindu country, and that our beloved Prime Minister ought to legislate and grant automatic, citizenship to religious minorities who have come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. Now here itself, if he's forgetting if actually India was supposed to be made a Hindu country, right? There would have been a big, complete balkanization of India, and India is what it exists today couldn't have existed. Okay, right? So remember, it's the Muslims who didn't want to live in India who feared the Hindu majority left India. Those Muslims who didn't fear Hindu majority stayed in India. And besides there are a lot of states in India which are actually Muslim dominated. A lot of areas are there also. And remember, they are a part of our economy. They are brothers in arms. So I think something needs to be done. Right, this person definitely needs to be impeached. And this is very similar to when Justice Mahesh Chandra Sharma of Rajasthan Court observed that peacocks don't have sex. So there's maybe something needs to be definitely be done. These judges need to be told that this is not correct. But I think there's also the other possibility that his words may have been taken out of context, right? And what he might just be asking is that to grant automatic citizenship to non-Muslim religious minorities who are persecuted from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc. So we give him the benefit of doubt, but I think he should be more, as a person in public domain, he should be more careful in doing this. Okay, then basically it goes. This article talks about going through overall the issue. So in the 1980s, there was rapid expansion of judicial power. This expansion was motivated by a sense that judiciary has long been a conservative institution and had taken the side of the landed interest, that has been against the land reforms, right? And this needed to change. To accomplish this, the Supreme Court began to dispense with procedural checks upon power, and it allowed public interest cases to be filed on the behalf of those who were unable to access the court, right? And we had the 42nd Amendment as well. We had Article 39A, legal aid, etc. Now, PIL was allowed, etc. So then, this became to be called as judicial activism, and the court began to engage in a host of administrative activities, right, from managing welfare schemes to beautifying cities to overseeing anti-corruption initiatives. So this is what and what happened was the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court became an administrative court. It was justified, right, this thing by that saying that politicians are corrupt, bureaucrats were inefficient, and things did not move. Somebody had to come and clean it all up, and judiciary became the savior. The combination, this became, judiciary as an infallible solution to all social problems and, viewing procedure. And that would otherwise constrain judicial power. So think, what is this? If you've seen Jolly LLB, it basically says is that, in that movie also, it says that, people say that we will see you in court because they believe in judicial power, right? Now, what is happening is the courts, have a mixed, in the recent days, have a mixed, scene that whether they will protect civil rights or not. Okay, so in far too many cases, they have tended to defer to the executive and the government, right? There were judgments like the National Anthem Order, the Recall Order, the NRC process, right? And the Justice Senzi Sefore altogether has, made a very frightening prospect of that our executive court. Okay, let's look at the next one. This is by Rashmi Sharma. She's an IS officer, right? A former IS officer, and it's talking about the death of the, inspector Subodh Kumar Singh, shot while trying to control a mob of, cow vigilantes in Buluchan district of Uttar Pradesh, and it is a vivid expression of contempt of a ruling class and those aligned him for the rule of law. And there's the increasing number of human sacrifices for the alleged protection of cows and signals a steep rise in contempt. These incidents shock us because they are graphic and indicate a discernible change for the worse, right? And I think the police themselves have let it, because they have totally been subsumed or reduced by the politicians. So that is one of the reasons. So it's obviously very shocking and terrifying. Lawlessness is definitely there. Okay, she says the police station was structured to perpetuate lawlessness in two ways. It is unable to, right, enforce the rule of law. It is manned by 16 people in all, with 6 of its 22 posts, vacant. It is headed by SI. They expected to serve to 83 villages along, across 2680 square kilometer. And you are expected to investigate crime, maintain law and order. Obviously you're deployed by VIP duty. Personnel rotation, though it is rapidly there's at least one transfer a month. So obviously there's so many issues that are happening. So the deep-rooted corruption, this article talks about this corruption itself in a police personnel themselves. Are feared by the community. They are avoided by the village people. There are tales of police greed and brutality. Constables extract money from vehicles plying the highway, snatch away mobile phones of ordinary people, return them only when they're paid money, right? And obviously, they even take money to solve the case, right? And there are always cases that attempted rapes are ignored after money exchange hands. So all these things are happening, right? So therefore, police personnel obviously themselves, have admitted to many times it was difficult not to be corrupt, right? And that's also the case. So she basically says that the dull-looking police station was not newsworthy. These activities did not shock anyone, and that is the reason that this pervasive lawlessness has now become habituated. It is out of this system of lawlessness that more dramatic incident like the death of Mr. Singh emerge, and we remain apathetic to the systemic causelessness, which also needs scrutiny and action. That something needs to be scrutinized. We need to, change the police system all across India if we want a modern India, definitely. Then the Supreme Court basically asked the government to disclose the process for appointment of CIC and information commissioners. Justice Sikri said was basically told that 65 applications have been received and to be for the post of information commissioner. There was a petition actually by Anjali Bhardwaj. It's saying that the state governments and central government have stifled the functioning of RTI Act by failing to do their statutory duty for ensuring appointment of commissioners in the CIC and the state information commissions in a timely manner. So this is something. And they will also tell there are 4 vacancies in the CIC, and there are over 23,000 appeals which are pending. So there is a huge backlog because of non-appointment of information commissioners, right? And several information commission take several months, even years, to decide appeals and complaints, and this leads to accumulation itself, and it defeats the objective of the RTI. Then obviously Citizenship Amendment Act, as we talked about, Mr. Desai talking about this. So the bill basically, which was introduced in Parliament, basically talks about that the people from minority communities from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., right, have been applying for citizenship under the Citizenship Act, and they're unable to produce proof of their Indian origin. Hence, they're forced to apply for citizenship by naturalization, which is spread to 12 years. So basically, bill says that these communities, right, should shorten. We should shorten this, presidency period to 7 years for gaining, naturalization. And the bill also empowers the government to cancel registration of the OCI in case of violation of Citizenship Act or any laws. So obviously, this is one of the other problems. The problem with this bill is very simple. It distinguishes illegal immigrants on the basis of religion, and this is against our constitution itself, against a secular thought process. So this cannot happen, definitely. And the bill would also hamper the Assam national registration of citizenship, right? Which basically, because NRC does not distinguish on the basis of face, unlike the 2016 bill. Okay, so bill basically is seen by effort by the BJP to make good on the election promise of making India a safe haven for Hindus persecuted in the 3 foreign nations, right? And obviously this move was obviously drawn flag from the Somgan Parishad, and they have even threatened to break ties with the BJP if this bill is passed. And they say that this bill is a threat to the cultural and linguistic identity of the people of Assam. And they said that the bill, if passed, would be challenged on the grounds that it violates Article 14 and is moved to, disturb the NRC, right? So this is something extremely contentious, I would say. Then we have the Brexit issue. This is going on. Theresa May, achieved, something very good. She basically, she wins the vote because there was a, no confidence vote against her on Wednesday this week, and she remains a leader and gains immunity from former challenge for 1 year. And more than 170 MPs declared their backing for May by Wednesday evening. She only needed 159. Right, so the fresh round of leadership election will take place, right, if May loses, right, but this did not need a general election. So what's next? Parliament will vote, right, on the May's deal by January 21, and the UK can seek more time to implement Article 50, but if the EU countries agree to this, and this might not happen. And then the country can revoke and trigger Article 50 again. This would be legal challenge because now you will harden the stance. UK can go for other referendum, but this would require legislation. But obviously, this totally depends on the voting on the deal. The Brexit altogether can be cancelled, right? The Britain can revoke the unilaterally, though current appetite for option is low among lawmakers. So this is a huge issue, I would say, right? So Theresa May says that a week spent tearing the RSL apart will only create more divisions, and she says she'll finish the job, right? But right now, if you think about it, the British people are actually quite confused about the whole deal. Right, 45% of Britons believe that May deal does not respect referendum result, and obviously, faced with the choice of accepting the deal or second referendum, basically, 56% of the Britain's people favor a new referendum, right? And a lot of people also think that she should step down both as party leader and prime minister. But a lot of people also feel that change in leadership is likely to result in a better deal. But only 25% people say that, okay, no deal would be a good thing. So again, would be very useful, right? Okay, so let's continue. In case you do not haven't gone through the Brexit or haven't gone through our videos before in which we have discussed the Brexit in detail, right? You can go through them, right? In various descriptions we have the details there. Okay, then India and Russia obviously will simplify export clearances to take forward joint manufacturing in defense. Remember, we are already manufacturing a lot of things. Remember in 1962, the MiGs were, India was given the license to manufacture MiGs. Our nuclear submarines are also partially constructed by, the Russians, or they actually help us in technology transfer. The BrahMos missile is an example as well of Indo-Russia joint defense production. Right. So let's look at Suggestion Phase 1. So this basically says the Supreme Court says that the rights of the elderly population of the country is an emerging situation, and it has not been envisaged in the Constitution. And the court directed the centre to prepare a plan for giving publicity for the provisions of the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act of 2007. So one thing I would like you to do is go through this act today, right? And right. State governments should ensure and carry out the provisions of the state in the absence of suitable number of old age homes, right? Normally what happens is these people are left to fend for themselves, making them vulnerable to mishaps and unforeseen events. Even the hospitals, geriatric divisions, we don't have enough data about them. Now, the number of elderly people, this data I think you should copy. This would be used in any answer. Like there was a question on globalization. Right, there was a question on globalization, impact of globalization on elderly people in 2013. So that is again something you can try to write today. It is projected that number of people in India would increase to 14.3 crore people and 17.3 crore in 2026. So this is very there. Further, the court said that there's a pittance paid to senior citizens in the form of pension. When those are, the various old age schemes is like 200 or 500 rupees, which is nothing. So right, so that is something that definitely needs to be increased. So both, Gupta, who was, a very, very famous curator, right, has been named as being a serial sexual harasser, and this is by several young women have also corroborated, right. So there's an Instagram account, Seen and Heard, right, and the anonymous ex-colleague, right, also collated accusation by several young women, right. She, basically there have been many occasions when he has, acted inappropriately, right, and grabbed the hand, touched the stomach, etc., right. So this definitely needs to be done, and needs to be taken away from the Serendipity Arts Festival, which is to be held from 15th, and this has happened already. And then, as you know, we have section 377 as the top query of 2018 on Google. So what is this? Section 377 of the IPC was introduced in 1864 during the British rule. It is modeled on the Buggery Act of 1533. Think about what kind of stupid person does this. Okay, it is used to criminalize sexual activities against the order of nature. Now, this order of nature is only order of nature in Britain, maybe. The portions of sections were struck down as unconstitutional with respect to gay sex by High Court in 2009. Then this was overturned by Sarvesh Kumar Naushkulu's Foundation in 11 December 2013. But on 6th of September, finally the court saw its light that don't expect the legislature to do anything. They decided that in Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India, Section 377 was unconstitutional, right? And so far as it criminalizes sexual conduct between adults of the same sex, right? But obviously it remains in force in relating to sex with minors, non-consensual sexual acts, and bestiality. So a part of it has been struck down. Okay, then schoolboys sexually harassed for nearly 6 months, and they're just aged 11 and 12, and they have been harassed by older people sexually, right? So the principal read out the material on sexual harassment awareness of students during assembly, right? And he said that like girls, young boys could also be subjected to sexual harassment, and such incidents should be reported to parents and teachers, right? Okay, and what happened was well-wisher of one of the boys called up 1098, and a child helpline visited the school. Following this complaint was done, right? So this is said that this is there are antisocial elements, the teacher said in Sarabit, and the police do not take any action, right? Besides these antisocial elements lure students into consuming alcohol and smoking ganja. So this is I think the SP of this area definitely needs to do something about these people. Okay, then Gandhi's statue has been removed because he was racist against Black Africans, right? And because they have cited passages written by Mahatma Gandhi claiming that Indians were infinitely superior to Blacks, right? So this is in Ghana and Accra, right? So I think the government of India does need to take this up with the people in Ghana and try to appreciate, they have to make sure that this misunderstanding should not, hamper India and Africa ties. Okay, then we have industries to pay conservation charges, right? Agriculture and defense units are exempted. So there's an article on groundwater. So it says, in a bid to promote conservation of groundwater, the Central Groundwater Authority has notified a water conservation fee. And as per this notification, industries are attracting groundwater, including mineral dewatering units, and those that use groundwater for packaging drinking water will have to apply for a no objection certificate. And individual households that draw groundwater using delivery pipe of greater than 1 inch diameter will also need to pay VCF. And how much is that going? Just to have a look. Okay, so if you draw up to let's say 20 cubic meters, that is 1 cubic meter is 1,000 liters a day in a safe block, it would cost a company 3 rupees per cubic meter. However, if you extract more than 5,000 meters a day in an over-exploited block, you would be charged 100 rupees, right? Residential, WCF can range to 1 to 2 rupees, right? So that is the idea. And why is this happening? Because India is one of the largest users of groundwater, right? The Central, Groundwater Authority classifies 6,584 assessment units countrywide, and 1000 have been categorized as co-exploited. Use this data. If you have geography optional, this is extremely important to you, right? And obviously, remember, India basically uses groundwater for agriculture, and only 25 BCM is used for drinking, domestic, and industrial uses. Okay, let's look at the IMPRINT answer in writing challenge. We looked at 2 questions which have come from means before. So the questions are on demographic development and employability, right? On good formal jobs. The challenge of good formal jobs. Both the questions are there, and the other question is on jobless growth. Please do try to write this answer. If you can't write this answer, or you have trouble, right, just try to write this answer, send it to us, and we'll correct it and send you the resources as well, right? Or you can visit our Facebook page. The question is actually tried there. You can look up in the answers written by previous students. Thanks so much.